Good morning to everyone. So let's start today's lecture. Right. So in the last lecture, we had started the topic of Turing machines. Right. So we had basically motivated the need for Turing machines, right? Which is so Turing machine is basically the most powerful computing abstraction, and whatever. So this language recognition problem, right? So whatever can be recognized by a Turing machine. Right? So those are the only languages that can be recognized by any computing device. Right? And we had also formally defined what is a Turing machine, right? So just to quickly recap, so Turing machine has a state component, and along with that, it has this infinite tape. So there's this tape which is infinite in both directions, and it's composed of a number of squares, right? An infinite number of squares. So the input is first written on the square, basically on the tape, right? And it's surrounded by the special symbol called blank. Right? So there is an infinite number of blanks on both directions of the input, right? And so then there is also a read head, right, which is points to a particular square on the tape, and in every step, the Turing machine basically consults its state, and it reads whatever is there under the read head, and depending upon the state and the symbol that is present under the read head, it makes a move, right? So it can change the state, right? So in every move, it changes the state potentially to the same state as it was. Then it replaces whatever was there under the read head, right? Potentially again, right, with the same symbol, and then it moves the read head one square to the left or the right, right? Uh, and it's possible that a TM may not do anything, right, for some particular for some particular state and a particular symbol under its read head. Right? So then we defined this notion of a configuration. So the configuration of the TM gives all the information, right, about the current state of the TM. So since there is so the configuration involves both the state as well as the contents of the tape, right? But the tape is infinite. So therefore, however, the non-blank portion of the tape is always going to be finite, right? So there's going to be an infinite number of blanks, but the non-blanks will always be finite, and so therefore in the configuration we basically look at the leftmost non-blank and the rightmost non-blank, and everything in between those two is represented, right? So is represented in the configuration. So this is a very succinct way of representing the entire state of the tape, right? So along with that, we also need to give the position of the read head and the state of the state component of the TM itself, right? So that is represented. So the position of the state, right, in the in this configuration represents the position of the read head, right? So in the sense that if you have if you have a configuration like alpha, q, and beta, right, then what we are really saying, right, is that on the tape, right, we have alpha and beta, which is surrounded by blanks on both sides, and the read head, right, basically points to the first symbol in beta, right? So this means that so whatever is there on the immediate right of the state component q, right, that's the position of the read head. Okay. So that's how you basically read the configuration of the TM, right? And depending upon the moves that are made by the TM, we can also define this goes to relation between the configurations, right? So for example, right, so here if delta of q comma z is equal to p by r, right, then this basically defines uh, this goes to relation, right, between these configurations, right? So what we are saying here, right, is that essentially the state of the tape is that I have alpha, right, and then I have the z, and then I have beta, right? And then q basically points to z, right? And this transition function says that if so delta of q comma z is equal to p by r, right? So the state changes to p, z is replaced with y, and q moves by one step, by one square. The read head moves by one square to the right. So therefore, the new configuration is basically going to be, so alpha remains unchanged, right? Z is replaced with y, and q, and the read head will basically, the state changes to p, and the read head points to the first symbol of beta. Right? And similarly, we can define the goes to relation for the other configurations as well. Okay. So are there any questions regarding the last lecture? Okay. So let's define these concepts of halting and looping. So we say that a TM halts at a configuration if there is no transition that can be made from that configuration. Right? So basically this means that if you are, so you basically consult the transition function of the TM, right? And if you find that, so this transition function was defined as a partial function, right? In the sense that for some state and for some symbol, there may not be any transition, right? So if you reach that particular state, right, and if the read head points to that particular symbol where there is no transition, then we say that the TM is going to halt at that configuration, right? So because there is no more move that can be made. So formally, let's say that you reach a configuration alpha q x beta, right? And you find that delta of q comma x is undefined. So here the state is q and the next symbol or the read head, right, points to x. And if delta q comma x is undefined, then alpha q x beta is a halting configuration, and the TM basically halts, right? So it cannot move further if it reaches this configuration. Now it's possible that a TM can forever loop without halting, right? So it will start from the initial configuration, right? And then it never reaches a halting configuration. So in which case we say that it's going to loop. So we saw an example of a looping Turing machine, right? So the example Turing machine that we defined earlier, right, in the last lecture. So we saw that it basically looped on the input epsilon, right? So remember that this example Turing machine was very simple, right? So it basically started with some binary string, right, and it moved to the right until it found a one, right? And then once it found a one, it converted it to zero and then halted. Right? But if it basically encountered a blank, right, then it would convert that blank to one and move to the left. Which means that if you start with this with the input epsilon, right, then this Turing machine is going to forever move to the left, right? So it's never going to reach a halting configuration, and we say that in which case it is always looping. So at this point, it's also beneficial to think about the earlier abstractions, right, that we saw. Right. So in particular, a finite automaton and a PD. Right. So you should think about this question, right? That can a finite automaton loop forever on an input? Right? And similarly, can a push-down automaton loop forever on an input? Right. So is this something that is unique to the Turing machine, or is this behavior also possible in the earlier abstractions that we saw? So quickly, right? So can anybody answer this? So can a finite automaton loop forever on an input, or is it always guaranteed to halt? Okay, so Madhula J. Kamal is saying that it's always guaranteed to halt at some point. So you are right in that deterministic finite automaton. Right? So DFA would so DFA at every step always consumes a symbol, right, from the input string, and therefore a DFA is guaranteed to halt. But on the other hand, right, let's say you have an NFA, right, or an epsilon NFA, then an epsilon NFA, right, can in principle make this epsilon transitions, right, an infinite number of times. Right? So in which case it's possible that an epsilon NFA may not halt. Right? And the same goes for a push-down automaton as well. Right? So in push-down automatons also, you can make epsilon transitions, right? And because of this epsilon transitions, right, you may actually halt or you may actually loop forever. So this is not something that's new to a Turing machine, right? So we have seen looping behavior earlier as well. All right. So now that we have defined this notion of vaulting and looping, we can. So Sanjit says that only a finite number of states in the NFA. Yeah, but you can have a cycle, right? So uh, even though there are only a finite number of states, you can have a cycle, say, involving epsilon transitions. In which case, you will just keep on looping between those states. I mean, even a Turing machine only has a finite number of states. So the finiteness of the states has nothing to do with looping. So is that clear? Okay. So Sanjay is asking that it won't be beneficial. Yeah, so you are right that it won't be beneficial, right? So in the sense that uh, well, I mean, if you want to, so if you want to say reject some input, right, then you might decide to loop forever, right? Because if you loop forever, right, then you're not really consuming the input symbols, right? And remember that the acceptance criterion, right, for this finite automaton and for the PDA was that you must consume the entire input, right? After consuming the entire input, if you reached a final state, right? Or in the case of PDA, if you empty the stack, then you would accept, right? But if you want to reject something, right, then you may decide to have this looping behavior, right? So, uh, but yeah. So Sanchit is asking that looping forever is not equal to rejection. So again, right? So this depends. Right? So if you, for example, from a final state, right, if you loop forever uh, using epsilon transitions, then that's not equivalent to rejection, right? But if from a non-final state, right? So if your loop, right, doesn't involve a final state, right? Then it would actually be equivalent to rejection, right? Because you will never reach a final state in that case. Okay. Right. So let's define the acceptance and rejection criterion for Turing machine. So Turing machine accepts a string if it goes to a configuration with a final state. Right? So use the final state in order to determine whether or not a string is accepted or not. Okay? And so let's say that from the initial configuration, right? So the TM starts processing the string, and if at some point of time, right, if it reaches a configuration where you have a final state, where you reached a final state, then the particular string will be accepted. Right? So formally, right? So if you start from the initial configuration, which is this Q0W, so this Q0 is the start state, W is the input string, and it is and the read head points to the first or the leftmost uh, symbol in W. Right? So beginning from this configuration, if you go to a configuration of the form alpha q beta, where q is a final state, then you're going to accept W. So note that here we are not really saying anything about consuming the entire input string W, right? So it's possible that you may not even see, right, some symbols of W, right, and you may still reach a final state. So that is fine in the case of a Turing machine. Right? So as long as you reach a configuration where the state is final, then the string is accepted. And then, so we can also define rejection. Right? So a TM rejects a string if it halts at a non-final state, right? Or if it loops forever without going to a final state. So there are two criterion for rejection. Right? So if you reach a configuration where the state is non-final and there is no more step that you can make, so in which case we say that the TM halts at that particular configuration, right, then the string would be rejected. Right? And similarly, if it loops forever without going to a final state, then the string would also be rejected. Right? So note that the way that we have defined a Turing machine, right? So it is deterministic. So in the sense that if you take a particular string, right, and if you process the Turing machine on it, then there is only there is only a unique sequence of steps, right, that you can take. Right? So there is only a unique configuration that you can actually reach. uh, beginning from the initial configuration, right? So if this unique configuration, right? If you basically halt at some configuration, and that configuration has a final state, then the string will be accepted. If the configuration has a non-final state, then it will not be accepted. It will be rejected, right? Or you may not halt at all, right? So you may loop forever, in which case you're also going to reject the string. So depending, so now based on this acceptance and rejection criterion, I can define the languages of the Turing machine. So Turing machine defines a language by its final state. So the language of the Turing machine is the set of all strings uh, which uh, which are basically accepted by the Turing machine. So which means that beginning from the initial configuration Q0W, if I can reach a configuration where the state is final, then the string is accepted, and it's part of the language. And only those strings are part of the language, which basically take the Turing machine to an accepting state. So by convention, right? So we assume that all the final states are halting. So note that if the final states are not halting, right, it doesn't really matter, right? Because as soon as you reach a final state, right, you know that you are going to accept the string. So it doesn't matter if you then take more steps, right, after reaching the final state. So Vedant is asking that if all final states are halting, then why need many final states? Right? So again, right? I mean, this is just a convenience, right? So there are some definitions, right, of Turing machine which only say that there is a single final state, but this is just a convenience, right? So it's the same, right? So it doesn't affect the power of the Turing machine. Right? So even if you have one final state or you have many final states, uh, it's all equivalent. But yeah, it's just a convenience. So as I said, right, so if the final states are not halting, then it doesn't really matter, right? So that's why we assume that the final states are all halting, which means that if Q belongs to F, then delta of Q comma X is undefined for any X in the tape path. So any questions regarding this? Okay. So let's now define the class of languages which are accepted by Turing machine, right? So, or which are defined by Turing machine, right? So we saw for finite automaton, right? We had regular languages, and for push-down automaton, we had context-free languages. Right? So the class of languages that are defined by Turing machines is called recursively enumerable languages, right? Uh, so there is this term recursively enumerable, right? So you might wonder why we are using this. So what is recursive about this, right? So there is no relation between the terminology and the definition of Turing machine, right? So the term actually predates Turing machine and refers to another notion of computational functions, right? Uh, so there is no direct correlation, right, between the term recursively enumerable and the way the Turing machine is defined. So there is another class of languages which is defined by Turing machine, which are called recursive languages. So let's look at what is a recursive language. So first, let's define what is an algorithm, right? So you might have seen other definitions of algorithm, right? So this is a definition of algorithm in terms of a Turing machine. Right? So we say that an algorithm is a Turing machine that is guaranteed to halt whether it accepts or not. So which means that so we know that a Turing machine, right? So whenever you run a Turing machine on an input, right? If it accepts, then it's definitely going to halt, because we said that the final states are halting. But if it rejects, right? Then there are two criterion, right? So it can either halt at a non-final state, right, or it can loop forever. So an algorithm is a Turing machine where you are not allowed to loop forever, which means that at every input, right, you can either halt at an accepting state, or you can halt at a non-final state. Okay, so no matter what input you give, the Turing machine is guaranteed to halt. whether it accepts or not. So such a Turing machine is called an algorithm. It's also called a total Turing machine. And now, so this total Turing machines or algorithms define recursive languages. Right? So if L is equal to Lm for some Turing machine M, that is an algorithm, then we say that L is a recursive language. So again, this term recursive, right? So there is no recursion as such in a Turing machine. So it's a term with history, and again, there is no direct correlation between the Turing machine definition and this notion of recursive language, right? So once again, right? So let's look at this recursively enumerable languages, right? So any language that is defined by a Turing machine is called a recursively enumerable language, right? However, recursive languages are those that are only defined by total Turing machines, right? Algorithms, which means that if you have a Turing machine, right, which always halts for any input, right, then it's a total Turing machine, and only the languages which are defined by this total Turing machines are recursive. So the set of recursive languages is a subset, right, of the set of recursively enumerable languages, right? Because any recursive language is a recursively enumerable language, right? After all, I mean, it is defined by Turing machine, right? So that's why it's a recursively enumerable language. But there are languages which are recursively enumerable, but which are not recursive, which means that they are defined by Turing machines, which will loop, right, for some input, right? So they won't halt. They're not guaranteed to halt for every input, right? So from a practical point of view, right, Turing machines which loop forever are not very useful, right? So in fact, so this was a question that was asked, right, by one of you earlier in the lecture itself, right? That it's not really beneficial to loop forever. Right? So let's say that you want to use the Turing machine to perform some task, right? And if you and to perform some task, right, or to basically know, right, whether or not some string belongs to the language, then you want the Turing machine to terminate, right, at some point, right? Uh, so only recursive languages, right, would guarantee that, right? Because they have total Turing machines. So if you run the Turing machine on some string, right, then it will then the Turing machine will be guaranteed to halt, right, whether or not the language is in the string or not. But if you were to have a recursively enumerable language, right, and if you want to find out whether or not some string belongs to this RE language, right, then if the string does belong to the RE language, the TM will definitely halt. But if it doesn't belong to this language, right, then it may halt or it may not halt, right? So if it does not halt, then you're not really sure, right, that when to stop, right, when to stop the computation of the Turing machine, right? So because I mean, it's possible that it may actually accept, right, and halt after some number of steps, right? But you're not really sure when to stop. So that's why, from practical point of view, recursive languages are more important. Okay. So are there any questions regarding this difference between recursive and recursively enumerable languages? Okay. So let's look at a couple of examples of Turing machine. So in fact, we have seen one toy example, right, which didn't really do anything useful. So let's try to design a Turing machine for a more complex language. So in fact, let's design Turing machine for this language AN, B, and Cn, where n is greater than or equal to 0. So this language, we have not seen any machine for this language, right? Because this is not a CFL, right? So you can prove this using the pumping lemma that this language is not a context-free language. So which means that it's also not a regular language, and therefore no finite automaton or push-down automaton can recognize this language. But we can define a Turing machine to recognize this language. Right? So first, instead of directly designing this, right, let's intuitively try to understand how a TM can do this, right, and then we will look at the complete description of the Turing machine, right. So what we are going to do, right, is that we are basically going to match the number of A's with the number of B's and the number of C's, right? So which means that, so we will do this one by one, right? So we will match a single A with a single B and a single C, and we will keep on doing this, right, until we have matched all the A's, B's, and C's, right? And if there are any remaining A's or B's or C's, then we are going to reject. Otherwise, we are going to accept, right? So we'll do this in a number of passes, right? So we'll make a number of passes over the entire string. So first, we are going to make this left to right pass, right? And in this left to right pass, we will mark the first A, the first B, and the first C that we encounter. And to mark, we introduce the symbols A hat, B hat, and C hat, right? So let's so basically the Turing machine, right, initially is going to consist or is going to have this number of A's, right, and then number of B's and then number of C's on its tape, right, and then the rest of the thing is surrounded by blanks, right. So at every step, right, we are going to mark the leftmost A, the leftmost B, and the leftmost C, right, and we'll mark this by basically replacing them with the special symbols A hat, B hat, and C hat. Right? So, for example, in the first step, right, you would mark this A hat, this B hat, and then this C hat, right? And then, so you do this in a left to right pass, right? And once you have marked a single A, B, and C, you are going to move from the right to left, right? And you will keep on moving this, and you will keep on moving without really altering the string until you reach the leftmost A again, right? So while moving from right to left, you won't alter the string. Right? So while moving from right to left, you will encounter. So let's say that you have basically converted some number of A's, right, and some number of B's, and some number of C's, right. So while moving from right to left, you may encounter C hats, B's, B hats, and A's, right. So you will skip all of them until you reach the first A hat, right, and then you will move to the left, right, and then you will continue, right. So again you will again make this left to right pass where you will mark the first A's, the first B, and the first C, right. So we then make a right to left pass until the first mark A hat, leaving the tape unchanged, and then we repeat the process, right. So if you keep on repeating this process, right, so eventually what will happen, right, is that you will reach a situation, right. Let's say if you had equal number of A's, B's, and C's, then you will reach a situation where all the A's are marked, right. So which means that after reaching the first A hat, right, in a right to left pass, the very next symbol would be a B hat, right. So in that case, you will make so now you know that you have basically marked all the A's, right? So you need to make sure that you have marked all the B's and all the C's as well, right? So therefore, you will make another right to left pass, right? So where you will just check whether or not there are any B's or C's. So if there are any B's or C's, then you will reject. And if you don't encounter any B's or any C's, and if you directly encounter blank, right? Then you know that you have equal number of B's and C's as A's, and therefore you will reach a final state. Right? Otherwise, you will reject. So the above process is repeated until in a left to right pass, we find that all the symbols are marked, and at this point we move to a final state. Okay. So yeah. So this is this sort of a high level view, right, or intuitive view of how how we are going to design this Turing machine, right. So concretely, right, let's now define the states and the transitions of this Turing machine. So you can sort of express this as in the form of a table, right, where the rows of the table, right, corresponding to the states, right. So I have 4 states here from Q0 to Q4, and I also have a final state F, right, which I have not depicted in this table, right, because final state F, right, is a halting state, right? So therefore there is no move that is defined for a final state F, right? So that's why it's not present in this table, right. So there are a total of 6 states then, right, and Q0 is the start state, and the columns correspond to the various the alphabet, right? The symbols of the alphabet. So we have A, B, C, and then we have this marked A hat, B hat, and C hat, and then the blank, right? So very quickly, right? So let's look at some of the states in the transitions, right? So this Q0, as I said, right, is the start state, right? So beginning from Q0, I'm going to make this left to right pass, marking the first A, right? So whenever I see an A, then I'm going to move to the state Q1, right? So I can also express this diagrammatically, right, as follows, right? So from Q0 to Q1, if I see an A, right, then I basically convert it to an A hat, and then I move to the right. So this is how I can express it in the form of a diagram, right? So from the Q0, I will mark the first A that I see, or the leftmost A that I see, right? And I will remember that I have already marked this A, right, by moving to the state Q1. Okay. So note that there are also other transitions from Q0, right? So in fact, so for B, C, and A hat, right, there are no transitions that are defined out of Q0, right? Which means that the machine is basically going to halt at that point, right? So this makes sense, right? Because remember that the string, right, should be of the form A star, B star, and C star, right? If you express it in the form of regular language, right? So if you see a B, right, or if you see a C, right, then the string is not in the correct format, right? And that's why you have to reject it, right? There is also this transition on B hat from Q4 to Q4, right? So this corresponds to this final left to right pass, right, where you have marked all the A's, right? At which point you move to the state Q4, where we are basically going to check, right, whether or not there are any remaining B's or C's. Right? And finally, if you for example started with epsilon or the empty string, then you would have the transition on blank, right, where you will just move to the final state, right, because epsilon belongs to the language that we want to design the TM4, right? And so similarly, so Q0 is the state where we look for the leftmost A, and then Q1 is the state where we look for the leftmost B, right? So here in Q1, right, I basically skip through all the A's, and then whenever I encounter a B, I mark it using B hat. Right? So I may also encounter previously marked B's, right? In which case I will just skip them. Right? And then I will move to state Q2, and Q2 I will again skip over the B's and look at the first C that is not marked. Right? And then I will mark it using C hat. Right? And yeah, so I keep on doing this, and once I reach and once I mark the C, right, I'll move to the state Q3, where I will move to the left, right? Skipping over all the C hats, B's, B hats, and A's until I reach the first A hat, right? In which case I will again move to the state Q0, right? So which is this particular transition, right? And finally, I have the state Q4, right, where I'm just checking whether or not there are any B's or C's, right? So if there are any B's or C's, I don't define a transition, right, which means I will halt. Okay. And finally, if I reach a blank, right, then I'll go to the final state. Okay. So is the design of the Turing machine clear to everyone? Are there any questions? Okay. So let's look at one more example. So here, so this example is slightly different because instead of recognizing a language, right, we are actually going to compute something. Right? So you can also use Turing machines to compute any function. Right? So in particular, right, so in this case, we are going to build a Turing machine that computes this function m minus n, right? But this is not your normal subtraction, but it's a special form of subtraction which is called the monus or proper subtraction, right? So here m minus n will be maximum of m minus n or 0, which means that if you give two integers m and n, so in this case we'll give two positive integers m and n, right? And if this m minus n is greater than or equal to 0, then it will give m minus n. Otherwise, it will give 0. So which means that if m is less than n, then you will simply get 0 itself. So you won't get a negative number from this subtraction. So let's see how we can build a Turing machine, right, which can compute this function m minus n. So we will use an encoding of m and n as an input. Right? So in fact, this encoding is very simple, right? So it's just the number of zeros. So m is going to take as input the string 0 m 1 0 n. So I have m zeros and then I have n zeros, which are separated by 1, and then I want to basically find out m minus n. And the way the Turing machine is going to express the output, right, is that the Turing machine m will halt with 0 m minus n on the tape. Okay. So it will basically halt with m minus n copies of 0 on the tape. Okay. And so if m is greater than or equal to n, right, or rather if m is greater than n, right, then it will have so many m minus n zeros on the tape. Otherwise, it won't have any 0 on the tape. So the way again this Turing machine works, right, is very simple, right? So you basically so since you have a number of zeros, right, and then you have 1 and then a number of zeros, right, you will basically pair the leftmost 0, right, before 1 with the leftmost 0 after 1, right? So you will keep on doing this, right, until you basically either exhaust the number of zeros on the left of 1 or the number of zeros on the right of 1, right? So m basically repeatedly finds the leftmost 0, and then in this case it replaces it with a blank, and then it scans right till it finds a 1. Okay, so the leftmost 0 is replaced with a blank here, right, and then it scans to the right until it finds a 1, after which it's going to further scan to the right until it finds the first 0, which is the 0 after the 1, which it will replace with a 1, right? So this 0 is going to be replaced with a 1, and then it further scans to the left to again the leftmost 0. Okay, so after a number of steps like this, right, so you will basically reach a configuration where you'll basically have a number of blanks, right, which are the zeros to the left of 1, which are converted to blank, and then you may have some zeros which are still left, and then a 1, and then you will have some number of 1s, right? So this, and then you will have a blank, which was originally here as well, right? So this is a configuration where m was greater than n, right? So that you basically converted all the n zeros to 1, right? And similarly, you converted n plus 1 zeros to blank, right? So and you are basically trying to scan to the right, looking for the 1, right? So and there is the other case, right, where m was less than or equal to n, right? So in which case you are basically going to have all blanks, right? And then you will have 1, and then you will have all 1s, and then you will have some zeros which are still left. Okay. So these are the two configurations that are possible, right? So now you need to basically recognize these two configurations and make appropriate changes, right? So that m minus n zeros are on the tape. Right? So the repetition continues until while scanning right after a 1, m cannot find a 0 but only blanks, right? So this basically corresponds to this scenario, right, where after scanning a 1, right, there are no more zeros to be found, there are only blanks, right? So in this case, I have to basically so I know that I have converted these n zeros, right, after the 1 to 1, and I have converted n plus 1 zeros, right, up to blank, right? So these are n and these are n plus 1, right? So I need to make sure that there are m minus n zeros still on the tape, right? And I can basically do this by converting all of these, right? So by converting all of these to blank again, right, and then converting this 1 1 to 0. So in this case, n zeros in 0m 1 0n have been replaced by 1s. So which are these n zeros, right? These n zeros, and n plus 1 zeros have been changed to blank, right? So remember that when I try to make this left to right pass, right, I basically convert the first zero, the leftmost zero, to a 1. Rather, the leftmost zero is converted to a blank, right? And then I search for another zero to the right of 1. So if I don't find another zero to the right of 1, then which is in this case, right, where I have basically converted all the zeros to the right of 1 to 1, right? So therefore, I have converted n plus 1 zeros to blank. So in this case, m is going to change the n plus 1 ones by n b's and then 1 0. And then there is this other scenario, right, where while scanning left, m cannot find a 0. Right? So this is the case where m is less than or equal to n. Okay. So in this case, m minus n is 0. So I'm simply going to change all the remaining ones and zeros to blanks. So again, right, so there is also the complete, you can also describe this this Turing machine completely, right, in the form of the states and the moves. Right? So I won't do that here, so it's there in the textbook. Okay, so you can refer to the complete description there. So any questions regarding these examples? So you can also design Turing machines to perform other computation. Right? So for example, any arithmetic operation, right, like addition or multiplication or division, can be computed, right, using a Turing machine. Right. So there are more examples. So I won't cover them, but it's useful to take a look at it, right? So I'll leave this as homework. So we saw this language WW, right? Where W belongs to 0, 1 star. So this is also not a CFL. So you can design a Turing machine for this. Again, this Turing machine is going to be very similar to this AN, B, and CN that we saw, right? So this Turing machine is completely described in the textbook. So you can take a look at it. This language 0 to the power p, where p is a prime. And so as it happens, this language is also not a CFL. Right? And in order to do this, we basically simulate this algorithm called sieve of Eratosthenes. Right? So this is a very famous algorithm to find out whether or not a number is prime. Right? So the Turing machine is basically going to simulate this algorithm. Again, this example is also there in the textbook, so you can take a look at it. So let's look at a regular language, right? So a regular language is also a recursively enumerable language, right? In the sense that, in fact, it's a recursive language, right? So there exists a Turing machine which can define that language, right? So you can simply simulate the DFA of the language. Right? So the TM can simulate the DFA of the language. And similarly, every context-free language is also a recursively enumerable language, right? So in fact, it's also a recursive language, right? So there are a couple of ways in which you can do this, right? So you can, for example, run the CYK algorithm, right? So Turing machine can simulate the CYK algorithm, right? Or a Turing machine can also simulate the PDA, right? Of the corresponding of the context-free language. And so these are the examples for recognizing languages, right? So similarly, there are also examples for performing computations, right? But these are more challenging, right? So for example, you can also do sorting using a Turing machine, right? So in this case, right, you have to encode the input, right? So the input in the sorting, right, is generally an array of numbers, right? So here this array of numbers is encoded in this form, right? So we have the numbers n1 up to nk, right? And these are encoded as 0 to the power n1, and then a 1, 0 to the power n2, then a 1, and so on up to 0 to the power nk, right? So basically the number of copies of 0, right, represent the number, and these are separated by a 1, right? So if you are given this particular string, right, when we say that we want to sort this array, right, so we want to then convert this or transform this into another string where we use the same encoding, but the sequence of numbers would be, say, increasing, right? So again, you can do this, right? So you can design a Turing machine to sort the list as well, right? And similarly, you can also design a Turing machine for searching. Right? So in the case of searching, we have a list, right, from n1 to nk, right? And then we have a specific number n, right? And we want to find out whether or not n belongs to this list, right? So again, you can encode this, right, by again using the number of copies of 0 to represent the elements of the list, and then there's this hash symbol, right, which is a special tape symbol which is used to differentiate this 0 to the power n, which is where n is the number that you want to search for, right? And again, right, so you can basically come up with some encoding for the output as well, right? So for example, you can say that if n is there in the list, then you will basically say leave 0 on the list, right? And if n is not there in the list, then you won't leave anything, so the output will be epsilon. So again, you can design a Turing machine for searching as well, right? But so you can try this out on your own, right? So I'm going to leave this as homework. So if there are no more questions, then I will move on to the next topic. Right. So let's now discuss some restrictions and extensions to this Turing machine model. So we need to study restrictions on the basic TM model, right? So the basic TM model, right, consists of this the state component, and then there is this infinite tape, right, which is infinite in both directions, right? So we'll study one restriction on this basic TM model, which is a tape which is infinite only in one direction, right, instead of in both directions. Right? So in fact, one of the textbooks, right, which is the Cozen book, actually defines the Turing machine as having a tape which is infinite in only one direction. Right? But as we will see, right, that a tape that's infinite in one direction can also simulate a tape that's infinite in both directions. Right? So why do we need to study restrictions? Assuming a restricted form makes it easier to talk about simulating arbitrary TMs. Right? So remember that one of the purposes behind defining or looking at this notion of a Turing machine, right, is we want to find out whether or not there are languages which cannot be accepted by any machine, right, or which cannot be accepted by any Turing machine, right? So in order to find out these languages, right, we need to simplify the TM as much as possible, right? We need to simplify the description of the TM as much as possible, and that's why we will study this restriction. So to exhibit a language that is not recursively enumerable. So we also study some generalizations of the basic model. So here, right, we are basically going to add more power to the Turing machine, right? And we'll see that by adding more power, are we actually computing more languages? Right? So we need to argue whether or not there is no more powerful model of what it means to compute. So for example, right, we have a deterministic Turing machine with just one tape. But if you have, for example, a non-deterministic Turing machine, right, with many tapes, right, say 50 6-dimensional tapes, then this Turing machine is no more powerful than the basic model, which means that any language that is computed by this more powerful Turing machine, or seemingly more powerful Turing machine, can also be computed by our basic Turing machine. Right. So in order to understand this restrictions and extensions, right, let's look at a couple of tricks, right, that you can use or that you can define on the TM. Right? So the first trick is multiple tracks TM. Right? So far our TM has a single tape, right? But we can think of this tape symbol, right, that is present in each square of the TM as multidimensional, right? So we can think of tape symbols as vectors with k components. So if you think of it that way, then you basically have a multi-dimensional tape, right? Or a tape with multiple tracks, right? So if a tape symbol is a vector with k components, so then you basically have a k-dimensional tape, right? And each of the component is chosen from a finite alphabet, and it makes the tape appear to have k tracks. So initially, right, the input symbol would be written in one of the tracks, and all the other tracks will be blanks. So for example, right, so here's a picture. It's just coming up. Yeah, so here's a picture of multiple tracks, right? So here, right, so there is just only a single tape, right? But each symbol in the tape alphabet, right, now is a vector, right? So in this case, it's a vector with 3 components, right? and therefore it looks as if this machine has the multiple tracks, right? So in this case, right, so this XYZ, right, is basically going to be one symbol of the input alphabet, right, with three components, right? And similarly, right, so this 0BB is also one symbol, and so on. Okay. So we'll see how exactly having multiple tracks is actually useful. And yeah, so the 0BB would represent, say, the input symbol B, right? So then so in order to represent the input symbols, they will be present in one of the tracks and there will be blanks in the other tracks. So another trick that we can use is to have vectors in the state itself, right? So the state can also be a vector. So this trick is called caching in the state, right? So now this vector, so the state has multiple dimensions now. So one of the components, right, of the state could be the actual state itself, and then the other components could be anything, right, that you want, right? So the first component is the control state, and the other components can, for example, hold data from a finite alphabet. So let's use both of these tricks in order to define our first restriction, right, which is a semi-infinite tape. Right, so we'll show that a semi-infinite tape simulates an infinite tape. Right? So we'll use a semi-infinite tape with multiple tracks, right? And with component, with a state component, which is also multidimensional. Okay. So what do we mean by semi-infinite tape? Right? So we say that so we can assume that the Turing machine never moves left from the initial position of the head. Right? So which means that so right now, right, we have this Turing machine, right, which is basically an infinity of squares in both directions, right? And initially, the read head points to the leftmost symbol of the input. Right? So in a semi-infinite tape, you cannot move to the left of this, right? So this is not allowed. So this particular so the tape on the left of the input is not present, right? So you can only move to the right, right? But in the right hand direction, it's infinite. So we can, right? So let's say that this position, the initial position is 0. The positions to the right are labeled 1, 2, and so on. The positions to the left are labeled -1, -2, and so on. Right. So this positions -1, -2 cannot be are not present, right? So now we want to say, right, that how do we actually simulate an infinite tape in which is infinite in both directions using a semi-infinite tape, right? So what we'll do, right, is that we can basically bend the tape in this case, right? So you can bend the direction on the left, right, of the input symbol, right, and what you'll get, right, is basically two tracks. Right? So a tape with two tracks. So the new TM is basically going to have two tracks, and the top track is going to hold the positions from 0, 1, 2, so on, and the bottom track first is going to hold the marker, right, and then it's going to hold the positions -1, -2, and so on. Right? So here is the diagrammatic representation, right, of this. Right? So this tape is a semi-infinite tape. It's also it's only it only extends in one direction, right? But it has two tracks, right? And the lower track basically stores the contents of the original infinite tape, right, to the left of the input symbols, right? And the upper track stores the tape which is to the right. Okay? And the state component, right, basically remembers whether or not we are simulating the upper track or the lower track. Right? So we introduce this new state component U or L, which is basically going to remember whether or not we are traversing the upper track or the lower track. Right? So in this way, right, we can use this programming trick, right, of two tracks and caching in the state, right? And using this, we can simulate any infinite Turing machine by a semi-infinite tape Turing machine, which means that if you have a language which is accepted by an infinite tape Turing machine, then there also exists a Turing machine with semi-infinite tape that can accept the same language, right? So that we only need to focus now on these Turing machines with semi-infinite tape. Okay. Right. So with that, I'm going to end the lecture today, and we'll meet tomorrow. So thank you.